So every piece of equipment has its own manual. If you don't have a manual yet, get a manual for your piece of equipment. There's PDFs online, but a manual will look something like this. This is for the engine outside on the BCS. And believe it or not, they have a whole troubleshooting section, which is wonderful depending on what problems you're having. So it's good to start there instead of just trying to mess around with it for a couple hours and then you can't figure out what's wrong. So if you don't have a manual, download a PDF, go online, find your model number, Google it. I'm sure there'll be a PDF of it somewhere so you can at least figure out what's wrong. It really does help a lot just to be able to go down that troubleshooting path in your specific piece of equipment's manual. Every piece of equipment has one. So definitely find that if you don't have it yet. Very important. And those are some of the troubleshooting issues that I'll cover. And then I'm also going to cover basic maintenance really quickly, and then we're going to head outside. So basic maintenance, I just pulled this off of a Briggs & Stratton website, pretty straightforward, but it kind of says it all. So based on your manual, you will have an interval of when you should be checking certain things over here. These are the things you check or replace. This is how often you do those things. It's hours or every season or however many months. All your cars have this. All things that have engines have these manuals, have these maintenance guides. So find your piece of equipment's manual and read it. Obviously, there's usually engine oil. Check oil level if the engine has oil. Change the oil or replace the oil filter so it has your interval for oil changes, filter changes, has your air filter interval change or clean, and then it has your spark plug replacement and fuel filter replacement. And so having all of those and just keeping up with that's really helpful. And I'll say this, if you have a production farm, having these things on hand can save you so much time, right? Let's just say if I'm out using a piece of equipment and I'm banking on that piece of equipment to perform a task that other tasks are relying on, it's pretty important that that task happen for that whole day. Maybe I have 4 people, apprentices standing here ready to do these other things, and then I can't get this piece of equipment to run whatever it is because, oh, it needs this one thing, or it needs the air filter is torn off, or it needs a new plug. This thing is just not going to work without it. If you have all of your pieces of typical maintenance items that you would replace, you can go in, grab it, and put it in and be ready to go potentially, as opposed to having to say, everybody just go home, or we're going to have to do something completely different today. So important to have your piece of equipment maintenance items on hand is what I'm trying to say. This isn't a BCS workshop. That's a separate workshop, but I will say, before we get out there, one asset of the BCS is that it has a power takeoff, which is the same thing on large tractors. What that is a little shaft that spins, and you can put different things on it. You can attach different things to it. You can put a tiller on it. You can put a mower on it. You can put a haymaker on it. You can put a snowblower on it. You can put a wood chipper on it. So what does that mean? Well, that means that I'm managing one engine. And so that's a really big asset to have in terms of a farm, is that I'm managing one engine instead of 10 engines to perform all those different tasks. Those 10 engines may or may not have all the same problems as another engine, but they're all going to need their own components that are specific to the manufacturer. They're going to need all of their own maintenance, and they're going to need all these different things, whereas with the BCS, it can do a number of different tasks with one engine. Easier to manage, easier to maintain, one engine as opposed to 5. That's pretty straightforward. Obviously, you can't go chainsaw with a BCS or with a walk-behind tractor, so that's off the options. But other things, instead of having a lawnmower, you could just have the BCS with a mower on it and a tiller, maybe even a trailer. I have a BCS with a trailer, so I can hook the trailer up, ride the BCS. It becomes also my little get-around cart. So there's a lot of great assets to having the BCS engine. So with that, we're going to step outside in just a second. I'm going to go over a couple things up here before we go out, just because it's easier. It's all in front of me. Again, just speak up if you have any questions. So in terms of maintenance and of cleaning equipment, I like to use, for the carburetors, the Berryman B12 Chem Tool. That's just a carbon choke cleaner. I've taken apart intakes, taken apart different engines, and I've tried different cleaners. And this just seems to really break down all that gummy grime that we're talking about. The same thing that gets clogged up in your carburetor, it gets attached to the walls of different parts of the engine too. And so this really tends to break it down and get that slime out of there really quickly. It's a B12 Chem Tool. B12, Berryman is the manufacturer. B12 is what it's called. And this is in every single auto parts store. I'm sure you've probably seen it when you walk in. There's also Seafoam. This is an older one. You can add this to the oil or gasoline as well. Again, I haven't had as much success with this as opposed to the Chem Tool. Also, I like to mention when I'm talking about these different solvents, brake clean. I use brake clean for cleaning up after maybe working on an engine. Put my pan underneath and spray it down to get the oil off of it. You don't want to drive into your vegetable fields with oil, dripping off the bottom of your machine. Obviously, question.
Are you saying the Seafoam and the B12 are the same?
They're similar, yeah.
Don't they just raise the octane rating of what you're doing by a bit and like burning at a higher? What?
Oh yeah, when you're poured into the gas into the gas tank, yes. Seafoam in car engines you can send through your intake, and it tends to break down the material in the intake. There's a spray version. This is the one that pours into your gas, and does that through the gasoline system. And the Chem Tool here, this is your typical spray can. So when you're working on some of these pieces of equipment, when they're broken down, you can spray them with this in your pan to clean them up. So that's the difference between those. And same with the brake cleaner. You can put the nozzle in there, spray things down. If you can't get something loose, PB Blaster is really great. This is just a penetrating lubricant. This is also a more professional industrial strength penetrating oil. So if you're trying to loosen something up on your equipment to maintain it or work on it if it's old and rusty, those work really well in getting things apart. I've restored different pieces of equipment, and I'll spray it for a couple days and let it sit and soak in and really get in there before I go out and try and crank on it, just because it's going to make my job a whole lot easier. Also grease, just lubricant. The lithium grease, it usually will not run off with water. The lithium stays on longer. I use that a lot. And then I also use just your PTFE lubricant, which is like something you'd use for a bike chain. And yeah, as mentioned, we have the stable up here. Now there's also this octane booster. Have you ever used the octane booster before?
No.
Yeah, okay. I grabbed this one day, I saw it in the store, and I thought, oh, well, I can buy 89 octane and then add this, and then I'm running at a higher octane. I don't know if that's true, but sometimes I pour it in. Even if it's old, sometimes I'll just, like the gasoline's old, I'll pour in some octane booster. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if that actually helps, but I pour it in because I think it does. Obviously, the stable is going to stabilize the gasoline more, but I've never seen actually any change in using this, so just don't use it. There's also stabilizers for your oil, which you can use to help lengthen the life of the oil in the engine itself. I've used this in the BCS equipment and the implements. Also, just side note, we're talking about maintenance of the overall machine. If you have a battery, this stuff I keep around, battery cleaner with the acid indicator. If you run into a battery that's all corroded, you can just come in and spray this right on that corroded area. It turns pink. It turns pink when there's acid, so then you know if there's acid getting out of the battery too. And then I just wipe that off, and that just keeps the battery lasting a little longer. Good for your car, of course. That's typically where you see it in your vehicle. You see it starting to get all kinds of junk around the positive battery terminal. Great for cleaning that up. I don't know how many folks have diesels in here. Our big tractors at the farm are diesels. I keep this diesel clean around. Just helps to keep the injectors clean, supposedly. It's good insurance, maybe, a little bit. So I keep this around and pour it in the tank occasionally. The diesel engine is a totally different, not totally different, but it's a much different engine, so we're not going to go down the diesel path right now. I'm going to go ahead and just assume that most folks in here have gasoline engines. Diesel engines are different than the two engine types that I put up there. But I do use this occasionally just to help protect the pump and injectors on the tractor. Obviously, funnels are important to have when you're working on equipment. Also, wrenches. I also brought in, there's a little black box on the front of the table up here. It says battery tender on there. So whenever you're going to leave a piece of equipment that has a battery, these BCSs do come with batteries and starters on them if you want. This one doesn't have one. Anything that you're leaving, a battery you're leaving sitting for a long time, you want to float it, it's called. And that's basically a way to float a battery. It keeps a charge on it so it doesn't die out while it's sitting there not being used. That way, when you go in to use the equipment, it's going to have a charge. It's going to be ready to go. So it's good to have hooked up to whatever equipment has a battery on it. That's that. Also, I have some other brushes and things up here. I use these. These are great little pumps. So this is a pump, a little small pump that I hook to my gear oil. It screws right into the top of a gear oil bottle, and then I'm able to pump it into whatever I'm trying to get it into instead of having to pour it. Sometimes you can't pour. You just can't get the angle to pour in gear oil. So this means you can just send it in through the pump like that. Kind of a useful little thing to have around. This funnel actually measures. So it has an on-off little valve right here. And you can measure it up here while it's closed and then put it into your whatever you're trying to fill up and then open it, and it has a filter, and that fills up the right amount that you want to put in. Those are useful to have as well. And then I'll show you all outside. This is a grease gun. If you're not familiar with these, this is important to grease connections if you have what are called Zerk fittings on your equipment. Lawnmowers all have them. Important to keep grease in those different parts just to make sure that it doesn't seize up or dry out, and then you have to replace more parts. So there's that too. Okay.
Yes, we have a small 4-stroke tiller for the garden, and of course chopping through roots and things like that, the tines got all tangled up. So we turned it on its side to undo it, and oil from the transfer from the oil case went into the carburetor, which we didn't know. Had to take it down, and what was it, $60-70 to get it fixed. And the guy told us, don't turn it on the left side, turn it on the other side, because as a 4-stroke, that oil will run into the carburetor. Now you've got a maintenance issue.
Oil ran into the carburetor from the crankcase of the engine. Does that happen, Richard? I've never had that happen.
Yeah, there's no reason why. If the valve's open, it'll just come right through the.
They ought to say, if turn on this side or
Right. Well, if the intake valve happened to be closed, it wouldn't matter. But if it was opened and you turned it on that side, then it could flow. The other thing is on some engines, cars are notorious. If you turn it upside down, a car has a shut-off switch in it. When it hits something hard, or if it turns beyond a certain point, it shuts the engine off. It's a little secret switch under the dashboard, but it's a safety feature. But in these mowers, they don't have anything like that. You could introduce oil into your compression area of between the piston and the cylinder head, which will immediately bend a very important, show it right there, you can see it. It'll bend the connecting rod between that flywheel at the bottom and the piston in the middle, and then your engine is essentially ruined. Because the oil doesn't compress. I mean, air and fuel can compress, but the oil cannot. And if you have an electric starter and you turn it, it's just going to bend, it's going to break something. I mean, it can't.
this guy just cleaned out the carb, put it back together.
Yeah, well,
Charged
that's
us $60.
But we can tip it on one side, but not the other.
Right.
Yes, so I would assume it would be the which port?
Well, whatever side the intake was on. I mean, that's, I don't know. It depends on the
It's a
engine.
good-
Told the same thing about a 4-stroke Honda. I brought it in and they said, yeah, you had it upside down or something and the oil went in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Just depending on where that valve is at that moment that it turns off. Don't flip it over. Yes.
On this oil problem, some of the engines have a crankcase vent, like
Yes.
a car does, or they have a PVC valve. Well, this vent goes up to the intake. And so if you turn it, it'll run through that vent, which normally is just vapor. But if you turn it on its side, it's liquid goes in there. If you can get it started, it'll run till it blow a lot of smoke for a while.
So the oil burns off.
But another thing, I had, did you ever explain why you put oil in the gas
A 2-stroke.
on a 2-stroke?
Yeah, so the reason, that's a good question. So the reason that you want to put oil into the gasoline is that there's no crankcase on a 2-stroke. Like you don't change the oil out on one of these chainsaws. There's no engine oil to change out. So the oil in the gasoline is what lubricates your cylinder. So it's lubricating the piston itself. So if you didn't have enough oil, or if you didn't have any oil at all in there, your piston could lock up just through heat and friction. So that's why it's crucial to put oil in your 2-stroke.
Would you see a smoke indicator before it actually seized?
Possibly not. You may not see anything at all. Yeah.
It'll smell. It'll smell.
It'll heat up.
It heat up first, then smell horrible, and then it shriek. I've done it. It'll shriek. It'll just come to a screeching halt, like a cartoon. I mean, like.
Yeah, so make sure you've mixed, yeah, so it's good to remember what you've mixed and what you haven't. That's why when you put a lot of these oils into the straight gasoline to make your two-stroke mix, most of them are like a deep, deep blue or a color, so that when you pour it into the gasoline tank, you'll know, oh, I've mixed that gas. So I know if I look in there and it's clear, obviously it hasn't been mixed, don't pour that in your two-stroke engine or in your tank. Go ahead and make sure that you have oil in there. Now I have gone, oh, I can't tell. I can't tell if I have oil in there. And I always go, well, I'm going to put oil in there just to be sure. Then you go out to use the equipment and it won't run. It may run, but then it just smokes like crazy. And that's not about to seize up. It's just getting too much lubricant, too much oil in the gasoline. And it's just blowing tons of smoke out. And then at that point, you say, all right, I'm going to drain this gasoline out, get the right mix, 50-1. Instead of 25-1 or whatever it ended up being, pour in the new correctly mixed gasoline, and then just keep cranking on it until it starts up and runs better, runs well. So that's why the ratios are important for the engine. So you can you find them in the manual. Some equipment will say it actually on the piece of equipment itself, but you want to make sure that the ratio is correct, or you'll end up with those same kind of issues potentially.
Common problem is too much oil and fouling the spark plug. So the spark plug cannot ignite the fuel because it's wet and there's oil in it.
Yeah, and then you may go change your spark plug, but your problem's still there, and it's gonna keep getting too wet and then not firing. So you want to make sure you fix both of those.
How do you discard gas safely?
So you burn it. No, I'm just kidding. So as a kid, I would have made it. No. What you do is the landfill usually takes gasoline certain days of the week. I typically take it in an actual gasoline container. Yeah, it's just like the oil. If you have old oil that you need to recycle, I keep old oil containers, which I brought, or you can have a nice one. It's outside, but I keep old oil containers to put old oil in, and then I mark it, and then you can take it, and then you can actually leave the container there is fine. There'll be a stack of containers, or you can open up this big lid for the oil and pour the oil in. But don't put gasoline in there. Wait for that day, and you can bring it. I usually bring it in an actual gasoline container. I've seen you bring in a 5-gallon bucket. I've seen people do that. But it's a great question, yeah. Because when you go to the landfill, there's no put gasoline here. You have to go ask someone and figure that out. So.
Do you know if other counties, like we're not in Mahoney County,
We're in Yancey County. They don't.
and they
do
don't do that.
We were told they do not.
So we're wondering, what do we do with the
That's a great
bonfire?
A lot of garages have
Have storage.
Yeah, just take it to a garage that
That's a good point.
uses
Yeah.
to heat in the winter. They just burn old used oil.
Yeah, she's talking gas, yes.
Diesel would work for diesel, because diesel is heating oil essentially. But yes.
AutoZone, or was it Advanced Auto? One of those two told us that they'll take oil and tranny fluid.
Yes, they do. Yeah, you can always bring that there, but they won't take gas. Yeah, it's super volatile, right? Gasoline's more volatile than diesel, or even aviation is less volatile until it's atomized. So I mean, gasoline is one of the most volatile fuels that you'll work with. So.
One place you do not want to put it is in your the 2-cycle oil in your vehicle, because even though you think old gasoline is okay, you mentioned that before, just gasoline, but if it's 2-cycle, if it's a mix of gasoline and 2-cycle, even if you had a 20-gallon, 18 gallons in your tank and you put 2.5 gallons of old fuel, the oil will almost instantly clog your fuel injectors, and they'll have to take every single one out, blow them clean, and put them back in. It's about a $400 to $500 service bill. So, but old gasoline is fine. I mean, it's going to get blended in with the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. Any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions before we move out? Oh, I brought safety equipment really quickly. I just like to mention it. So when I'm using a chainsaw or any power equipment, I like to have my my hard hat with the face mask and the ear protection. It's all built in. I just grab that. I don't have to worry about finding other ear protection. Kevlar chaps. I got this because I don't want to die. Kevlar upper coat. So I know a lot, you know, when I've taken chainsaw classes, my dad cut his whole arm open when I was a kid along his forearm. And so that's not protected by this actually, but the main arteries and some of the bigger arteries are. So this is all Kevlar up top. And then on gloves, this is a right-handed set. I'm right-handed, so there's Kevlar in the left glove where you're holding the saw. So that's safety equipment, nice to have. And I actually just cut my leg the other day, not badly and not intentionally, but the saw nipped the pants and the Kevlar string flew out and just locks the saw up immediately so it doesn't cut anymore. So good to have. Okay, any other questions before we move outside? Start tearing them apart. Cool, okay. Let's go ahead and get out there.